Would you like to design your very own persistent stats display using UMG and Verse inside of UEFN? Well, you're in the right place because I will teach you everything you need to know in this tutorial video. All of the assets that I use will be available for completely free inside of my Discord server by following the very first link in the description. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is we're going to create a new folder, and this is going to be called UI. Inside of the UI folder, we're going to make another folder called textures, just like that. Alright, so once you've created your textures folder, go ahead and import some textures here. I'm going to be using some that I have already. With all of them selected, right click, asset actions, and then do edit selection in property matrix. This allows us to edit the settings all at once instead of doing them one by one. Go ahead and expand this level of detail menu here. Make sure the MIP-gen settings is no mipmaps and the texture group is UI. And the LOD bias is set to 0. Make sure you save, and let's return back to the viewport. So I have a reference image here that just lets me visualize the player HUD, and for whatever reason it's yelling at me, so go ahead and right click conform texture and it'll get rid of that warning. Once you've got your textures set up, right click and do user interface widget blueprint. We want the user widget type, and I'm going to name this WBP underscore stats underscore UI. Double click it to open. Alright, so now that we're inside of the widget editor, the first thing we need is a canvas panel, and I'm going to resize this to 1920 by 1080. I'm also going to drag in the player reference, and I'm going to set this to top left anchor, reset the position, and do 1920 by 1080. Just like that. I'm going to lock it as well because this is just a reference. Alright, so now that we have our reference in place, we want to start working on the very first stat. So in this case, it's going to be the KD ratio. I'm going to first drag an image just like this. I'm going to set the anchor to the bottom left, and I'm going to reset its position just like this. I'm also going to set the alignment to be 1 on the y-axis because I want it to start from the left and from the bottom. I'm also going to drag it into place roughly like this, somewhere around there. I have some specific values written down, but you can put this anywhere you want on the UI. I just have it set up this way because I think it looks super clean, but I honestly encourage you to experiment and find out something that works best for your map. If you are following along and you like the way that I have it set up, go ahead and set the Y position to -200. We need this to size to content, and we want to set the image size to 112 by 64, just like that. From there, what we want to do is set the tint to black with an opacity of 0.33. Click OK. And we want to draw this as a rounded box with a rounding type of a fixed radius. From there, I'm going to set the corner radius to 16 on all sides, just like this. Now that we have the background set up, go ahead and rename this to ratio background image. Right click on it and wrap with an overlay, just like that. All right, so now that we finished working on the background image, let's begin working on the contents of this widget. The first thing that you want to do is drag a stack box inside of the overlay. This time we want to fill it horizontally but center it vertically. After that, we want to add a little bit of padding on the left and the right as well, just so that it has a little bit of space and it's not directly pressed up against the edge of the box. So now that the stack box is ready to go, let's go ahead and drag an image inside of there, and we want to center this vertically but align it to the left horizontally. We also want this image to be the KD ratio, this KD icon right here, and it's a little bit big, so I'm going to do 48 by 48 pixels. After that, I'm going to drag a text box in here, and this is going to be the actual value. So I'm going to set this to be aligned horizontally on the left and aligned vertically in the center. I'm also going to put a temporary value here called ratio like that. And I'm going to set the size to be something like 28, so it's a little bit smaller. I also want some padding on the left, and I'm going to add an outline of 2 pixels. All right, from there we can go ahead and rename this overlay to the KD ratio. I'm going to collapse it and press Control D to duplicate it. I'm also going to rename this to eliminations, just like that. And instead of repositioning the overlay manually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the KD ratio, shift right click the entire layout section, and I'm going to go back to the eliminations overlay, and I'm going to shift left click. That will paste all of the values from the original overlay. And because I know that this is 64 pixels tall, what I'm going to do is subtract 72 pixels, which will leave an 8 pixel gap, just like this. And because all of these follow the same style, all we need to do is find the icon inside of the eliminations and replace it with the eliminations icon like this, and scale it down to 48 by 48. And I am going to put this as elims, just like that. And one more time, I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, copy the layout, and I'm going to paste it. And don't forget to rename this to deaths, like this. And again, I'm going to subtract 72 pixels. So now they are evenly spaced out. From there, I can put the skull icon for the deaths and make sure it is sized correctly. And I'm going to put the deaths just like this. So with all of the widgets created, now we can link these to Verse using the new UMG integration. So the first thing we want to do is navigate to the variables panel. If you don't see it, click Window and click Variables right here. We want to add in a new variable, and this is going to be called eliminations, like that. This is going to be type message, and click the little check mark. We need another one called deaths. This is also going to be type message, and click the check mark again. Finally, we need one more called ratio, and this will also be type message. So the very last thing that we need to do is link the variables to the widgets. So the first thing is this deaths text right here. We just select the text and we click this little chain link icon, and we link that to the deaths. And we do this to the eliminations as well. We link it like this. And finally, the ratio down here, we click the link icon and select ratio. Go ahead and compile and save. All right, so now that we have the widgets and the variables fully created, let's go ahead and jump back into the viewport so that we can begin working on the Verse devices. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is open up the Verse Explorer by navigating to the top right here. We're then going to right click on the content folder and create new Verse file. Make sure it's a Verse device, not any of these other ones. And we're going to name this display stats device and click create. The next thing that I'm going to do is right click on the content folder and click open directory. This will expose the file path for our project, and I'm actually going to import a couple files from a previous video that I made recently. If you want to find out more information about how to use the persistent data, go ahead and click that little banner up at the top. It will lead you to a full breakdown of everything related to persistent data. This system that I'm going to be designing will be including it, and so rather than designing it from scratch again, I will be modifying it slightly so that it fits the purpose of this video, and that too will be available for completely free. I post all of my resources available for the members in my Discord. We'd love to see you there. Once you've got those files imported, go ahead and close out of the File Explorer and double click on the display stats device. So the first thing that you need to do is open up the player data file that you just imported, and we can go ahead and delete some of the values inside of here because we just need the version, the eliminations, and the deaths. So we want to initialize this by doing deaths is a type integer, and this will start at 0. We can also clean up the constructor as well and make sure that it is deaths equal src.deaths. After that, this file is ready to go and able to be used for this project. All right, so the first thing that I like to do is clean up all of this code here that was left for us by Epic Games. We also are going to need the unrealengine.com/temporary UI. I know this ahead of time because I already have the script written out, but I just figured I would put this here in the beginning so we don't have to go back and do it later. All right, so the next thing we want to do is at editable game manager, and this will be a reference to the game manager device. Just like that. And below, we're going to do elimination manager. This is just a device that will help us keep track of when a player dies and when a player gets an elimination. I accidentally put an R here. Below that, we are going to define a map called stats widget map, and this will have a key of a player, and the value will be the UI.wbp stats_UI, and that will be of type map. If you don't know what a map is, essentially it's just an array of key value pairs. So in this case, the player is the key and the value is the widget. So when we access the map, we will pass in a player and it will return a specific index of the map, which in this case is the widget that we want to modify and update. Once you've got that taken care of, we can go ahead and type the player spawner for game manager dot player spawners. And essentially this is just a for loop where it will loop through the entire array of player spawners inside of the game manager, and it will call a specific line of code or a block of code per spawner, and it will loop through all of these before moving on to the rest of the code. So in this case, you want to do player spawner dot spawned event dot subscribe, and we're going to do spawned event. Below that, we want to subscribe to the elimination manager dot elimination event, and for that subscription, we're going to pass in the elimination event. After that, we want to do elimination manager dot eliminated event dot subscribe, and this will have its own function called eliminated event. Finally, we want to do get play space, and make sure you do the parentheses player removed event, and we want to subscribe to that as well, and this is going to be player removed event. So now we want to actually block out the functions, and we can go and work through them one at a time. So we want to start with the spawned event, and this will listen for the spawned agent of type agent, and that will return nothing. We also need to do a init player widget, which will be a player reference of type player, and this will have a suspends effect on it, and it will return nothing. Below that, we want to do the elimination event, and this will be maybe eliminating agent, which is of type maybe agent. Below that, we want to do eliminated event, and this will be the eliminated agent, and that'll be of type agent, and that will also do nothing. There also seems to be a typo up here, so I will fix that. Below that, we want to do player removed event, and this will be leaving player ref, and that will be of type player, and that will return nothing. There's also a couple more functions that we need as well that will help us manage and update the UI. So the first thing that we want to do is update player widget, and this will take in a player reference of type player, and it will not return anything. Below that, we want to do calculate KD ratio, and that will take in the eliminations of type integer and the deaths, which is also in type integer, and that will return a float. So I'm going to put 0.0 here. The last function that we need to do is toTruncated string, and we want to have this take in a number, which is going to be type float, and the decimals, which is also going to be type integer, and this will return an array of characters like this. So for some context on what this function does specifically, This was actually passed down to me from another developer. I don't know where I got this function from, but I've had it forever. And essentially what this does is this takes a float and then it will cut off the number of decimal places. So for example, like 3.1415, etc. This becomes 3.14. Or like 123.4567, it will only become 123.45. Does that make sense? So with all of our functions blocked out, let's go ahead and start with the spawned event. What we're going to do is if player ref equals player spawned agent in the hard brackets like this. This is just a cast function which converts an agent into a player. And the reason why it's failable is because not every agent is a player. And this is because an NPC or a wildlife creature, I believe, don't quote me on that, but there are other types of agents that aren't necessarily a player. So if that passes and it is actually a player, then we want to spawn the init player widget and we want to pass in the newly defined player reference. Moving on to the init player widget function, we want to get rid of the parentheses and we want to sleep for 0.33 seconds. And this is to allow the game manager time to process the player in case they are a fresh spawn. It needs just a fraction of a second to initialize the player data and everything like that. We will be checking for that inside of this function, but it's better not to overlap them at the same time. So I just included this here as like a safety precaution to make sure that the devices don't overlap with one another. From there, we want to see if the player has an existing widget. So we're going to do existing widget, and that will be the stats widget map with the player reference inside of the hard brackets. And if you're wondering what this like autofill thing is, it's actually a really useful tool called Copilot. I believe it is like 20 or 30 bucks a month, and it gets smarter as you continue to build out your project. It's really useful and I highly recommend it, especially if you are pretty familiar with Verse. It helps cut back on a lot of like really repetitive processes, and it can definitely speed up your development by around 20 to 30%. So if they do have an existing widget, all we want to do is update player widget, and we want to pass in the player reference just like that. However, if they don't have a widget, we want to do else if, and then we want to grab their UI by doing get player UI, and then we pass in the player reference into the hard brackets. Once we've grabbed their UI, we want to define a new widget, which is just going to be UI.wbp stats UI, and we then want to set the value inside of the map to this new widget. So we do set stats widget map, and then we pass in the player reference as the key, and we set the value to new widget. We then want to add it to their UI. So we do player UI.add widget, and we pass in the new widget just like this. And finally, we do update player widget, and we pass in the player reference just like that. All right, so moving on to the elimination event. This happens when a player gets an elimination, not when they die, but when they kill another player. So in this case, we want to first define a few things. We want to first see if the eliminating agent is actually an agent. So we do eliminating agent is equal to maybe eliminating agent. We also want to get a player reference, so we do eliminating player reference is of type player, and then we pass in the eliminating agent. And the third thing we need to do is we need to get their player data. So we do existing player data is equal to get player data, and then we pass in the eliminating player reference. And don't forget the question mark on the end. Once we've defined all of those variables, all we have to do is use the constructor to update their elimination count. So we do updated player data, and this is of type player data, and we do eliminations is equal to existing player data dot eliminations plus 1, and then we do make player profile data, and we put the constructor effect, and we pass in the existing player data Outside of that, the last thing we need to do is if set player data, and then we just pass in the eliminating player reference and the updated player data with a question mark on the end. And once we've set up the constructor, all we need to do from there is just update the player UI. So we do update player widget and we pass in the eliminating player reference. I did updated, not update. After that, we can move on to the eliminated event, which is actually the exact same thing as the elimination event. So what we can do is just duplicate the entire thing and paste it. However, this does have a actual agent. It's not optional. So we can just go ahead and delete this, and we can copy the eliminated agent, pass that in, and make sure you change the name as well. So eliminated player ref, and I pass that in, as well as down here and down here. So this function is about 90% done. The one thing you need to be careful of is that they are actually dying, because the agent who died gets passed in. So we do deaths is equal to existing player data dot deaths. So I'm actually going to skip the player removed event right now because I want to build out some of the updating first, but it is important that we clean up the widget map. So I'm going to save that for the very end. All right, so moving on, the next thing we want to do is right above this update player widget function, we want to do to message, and this will localize. So localizes, and it will take in a string of type string, and it will return a message like this. And all we need to do is put the string in brackets. All this does is this will take a string and it will return a message. It's a very simple helper function that will allow us to easily convert these strings into messages, which is what we need to update the widgets. With that out of the way, we can begin working on the update player widget. So what we need to do is if player data is equal to get player data, and we pass in the player reference with a question mark. The player UI is get player UI, and we pass in the player ref. And finally, we define the widget itself. So we do stats widget map, and we pass in the player reference. Then what we want to do is KD ratio, and this is going to equal to truncated string, and we pass in the calculate KD ratio. I just realized there's an N here. We want to do player data dot eliminations and player data dot deaths, and outside of that we do close parenthesis comma and then the number 2. And this number here, this is the decimal places. So for example, 1.34, I like having 2 decimal places instead of 3 or 4 or 5 because it's clean, but it also is enough to where the player is like, oh, that's cool, it's like statistical, you know. From here it's super easy. We do set widget dot eliminations is equal to message, and inside of the parentheses we do quotation mark curly bracket player data dot eliminations close curly bracket close quotation, and then we drop down a line and we do the same thing with the deaths. So set widget dot deaths is equal to message curly bracket player data dot deaths close the brackets, close the quotations, and finally we do it one more time, which is set widget dot ratio is equal to message curly brackets KD ratio, like that. Moving on, let's get rid of the 0.0. Actually, I'm just going to put that at the bottom here so it doesn't yell at us while we write. We first want to do the results, and this is actually a dual purpose as well. So I'm going to have this be a float, which is equal to the eliminations times 1.0. And this is how you can convert an integer into a float. It's really simple and it's really easy to do. So if you ever need to do that in the future, there you go. We then want to make sure that the deaths are greater than 0, because if they aren't greater than 0, then the KD ratio will always be the direct result of the eliminations that they have. Because, you know, 10 eliminations divided by 0 is just 10 eliminations. So it would be divided by 1, it wouldn't be divided by 0, but you understand what I'm saying. So if it is greater than 0, we want to set the result is equal to the result, which is the eliminations, divided by the deaths times 1.0. So this is basically just saying if the deaths are greater than 0, we want to divide the eliminations by the number of deaths. Below that, we can do results, which will return the results. And there we go. This is how you can calculate a KD ratio very simply. All right, so this one is a little bit of a galaxy brain function here. So I'm gonna break it down for you line by line so that you have a full understanding of how it works. All right, so the first thing you want to do is define a result string, which is going to be an array of characters. And this is going to be toString, and we pass in the number. And this is basically just converting this float into an array of characters, which will allow us to locate and kind of manipulate the output. So we then want to do an if statement that says decimal index is equal to string.find, and we want to locate the period and add 1 to it. So basically what this is doing is it's scanning the float, which is a string. So if it was like 1 2 3 dot blah blah blah, it would locate the index of the dot specifically. Then what we want to do is, I'm actually going to return this at the bottom just so it stops yelling at us. We want to define the stop index, which is going to be equal to another if statement, and this is decimals is greater than 0. We then want to find the minimum number between the decimal index plus the decimals and the string dot length. And this is basically just preventing it from breaking, because if the decimal index is longer than the number of decimals that are actually in the float, it'll completely mess everything up. So if this is not the case, we want to just return the decimal index like this. And below that, we want to do if sliced string is equal to string.slice. We pass in 0 from the beginning, and the stop index is the end, and we do set string is equal to sliced string, just like that. We can get rid of that line right there. So this is everything that we need to update the UI, but there's one last thing that we need to do, and that's just clean up the widget map once a player leaves, and it's super easy. So let me show you how to do it. So what we want to do is if existing widget is equal to stats widget map, and we pass in the leaving player reference in the hard brackets. We then want to define a new widget map. So new widget map is of key player with a value of ui.wbp stats ui. And below that, we want to do for key value stats widget map. And as long as the player is not equal to the leaving player, we then want to do some more code. And basically what this is saying is, so it's going to loop through all of the key value pairs inside of the map, and it's comparing the value to the leaving player. So what we're going to do is set new widget map equal to concatenates maps new widget map, and then we do map in the curly brackets key with the equal sign arrow value like this. And basically all this is doing is it's creating a new map with every single person inside of the game except for the player who's leaving. And the reason why we do it this way is because unfortunately with the way that Verse is set up, there's no way to remove a specific key value pair from a map, and so instead we have to do it backwards, where we build a completely new map minus the person who's leaving. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and compile our code and hop back into the viewport so we can get everything set up. The first thing we want to do is drag out the game manager and scoot it over. We also want to drag out the display stats device right next to it. And we want to link the game manager to the display stats device. And this is because inside of the game manager, this is where we're going to link the player spawners. And rather than linking them all by itself, I thought that it would just be easier to link the game manager, because like we did in the beginning of the code, is we just pass in the game manager's player spawners. And this happens at runtime, so it's not a big deal. They will still register from the player stats device. After that, let's search for an elimination manager, drag that into the viewport. The settings on this device are pretty simple. We want the target type to be players only, and the other settings are totally up to you. Sometimes if you have like a storm based game, you can do storm eliminations are always valid, which means if they die in the storm, it'll still count as a death, things like that. I would highly advise not to do valid on self-elimination, because if they get eliminated, then it will also count as an elimination. So try to wrap your head around that one. Once you've got your elimination manager all set up, go ahead and link it to the display stats device. And from here, there is a couple extra settings that I'm going to incorporate into this project just so that I can demonstrate to you how it works. So the first thing we want to do is the island settings right here. I'm going to search for debug, just like this. I'm going to turn debug on, and I'm going to set the number of test players to custom, and it defaulted to 1, which is what we need here. After that, I'm going to search for an item granter so that I have a weapon to eliminate the test player with. I'm then going to search for assault rifle level 5, and I'm going to add that to the item granter array. And this can be any weapon. This is just an example, like I said. I'm going to set the grant on game start and set the receiving players to all. And one final thing, because I can't actually eliminate myself and show you how the deaths work, so I'm going to add a creature placer just like this, and I'm going to do a creature manager as well just so I can configure it. I'm going to set the damage to player is 100 and the movement speed is set to 0 so it can't actually follow me around. And once you've done all of this, go ahead and launch a session. Alright, so now that we are in the game, we can see right on the left hand side of the screen we have the kills, the eliminations, and the KD. So I'm going to go ahead and eliminate our trusted test player, just like that. And you can see that the KD updates as well as the number of eliminations. I'm going to go ahead and do that again. So now it says I have a KD of 2. Go ahead and test the deaths as well. You can see that it just went up by 1, and my KD stayed the same because I've died once and I've gotten 2 kills, which means I have a 2 KD. If I go ahead and die again, you can see my KD drops to 1. If I go ahead and kill myself a third time, you can see that it respects the decimal points as well. So it does 0.66. It stops at 2 decimal places. And no matter how many times I get kills or I get eliminated, it will respect the KD, even if it's like a really weird number. So you can see here, if I go ahead and eliminate myself another time, now it says it's 0.6. And it'll go down, it'll be, 0.5, 0.33, etc., etc. Other than that, that's everything you need to know on how to make a persistent stat tracker. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It was a really fun project for me, especially using the new built-in UMG. As always, I really do appreciate your support. If you're not inside the Discord already, I would love to see you in there. There's a ton of really cool people, and we're always just kind of chatting and, helping each other out. Other than that, peace.